And you would think that someone who is a preacher, someone who says that they are a Christian, that they would act like Jesus and that they would bring good news to those who are marginalized and oppressed. But this cat, this snake, he ain't got no good news. This cat's name is Scott Williams. He is the current chair of Oklahoma's Pardon and Parole Board. Let me tell you a little story. You see, first of all, in order to understand this cat, you've got to understand what prosperity theology is. You see, Scott Williams comes from a space in which he is taught that those who follow God, let me back up. He is teaching. He was taught and he is teaching that those who follow God are automatically blessed with abundance. These folks think that they've got a contract with God that is going to pay dividends. This is heresy. Heresy. To say that following God means you're going to be rich, that is heresy. The message of Jesus says, if you follow God, you will be found with the least of these, not the most of these, not the rich of these, not those who are in, but those who are out. Let me tell y'all something. Prosperity theology is used to perpetuate all sorts of evil. So it should be no surprise that Scott Williams, there on the Board of Pardon and Parole, functions as a heretic. Let me give you a little story to kind of illustrate what's going on here. I want you to imagine that there's a murderer that is sitting on Oklahoma's death row. This murderer is desperate for some good news. He is desperate for someone to lift his spirits. Well, he turns on his radio and he hears a powerful communicator coming from a mega church in Oklahoma City. You see, this pastor talks about grace and forgiveness. He talks about how Jesus can wash away even the vilest of sins. Based on that very message, this guy on death row decides in that very moment that he wants to give his life to Jesus Christ. From that day forward, this pastor told this man, you're going to be a new creation. And he was. You see, he went from being known as a murderer to being known as a seeker of God, a lover of God. Whenever he was able, he returned to the sermons of the powerful communicator that he had heard, the powerful communicator that had led him to a relationship with Jesus Christ. There was one message about walking on water. You see, the preacher, the powerful communicator, told him that if you want to walk on water, you got to get out of the boat. You got to trust God for all of your needs. And that message, that really helped this man. The seeker was determined, the man was determined to keep his eyes on Jesus. God will sustain you through even the most violent of storms, the communicator said. That guy on death row, he believed him. He found the message so powerful. Then there was a message about staying connected to Jesus, praying without ceasing. Even though this guy constantly felt alone on death row, the powerful communicator, the preacher, he assured him that things were looking up. Things are always looking up, looking up. Then there was this message about the feeding of the 5,000. The powerful communicator reminded him that God would provide for all of his needs. that all he needed was coming, and that there would be abundance to hand out to others. Man, the man on death row, he just ate these sermons up. They brightened every single day. Every single day. Then there was a message about the power of proximity. Growing closer, leaning in, walking with Jesus. The seeker was really touched by this one piece where the communicator, that powerful preacher said, if you are struggling, stand up. In his cell, there on death row, the man stood up. He said, I'm struggling. I'm here by myself. This is a dark, dark, dark place. I'm standing up. I want to follow God. I want to know Jesus. Then there was this other message about doing it God's way. This man committed every second he had to serving God. This preacher, this powerful communicator that came in over the airwaves, perhaps even that inhabited his television, changed everything about the way he functioned every single day. Gosh, he loved God. He loved his neighbor. There were countless messages that pushed him forward on and on and on. And in spite of a looming sentence of death, the seeker kept his focus on God. He trusted God to handle the rest. Man, there was even a particular quote that the guy on death row had inscribed into his wall. He had affixed it to his wall. It said, from the powerful communicator, from the powerful preacher, it said, whatever that giant is in front of you, if you choose to trust God, because that's when things begin to shake. I'm here to tell you that when you begin to have the courage about what God says, there are some things that man, that doctors, that experts are going to say is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. As a matter of fact, if you take the word impossible and give it a little space, it simply says, I'm possible. And that is what God is trying to tell you. I'm possible. If you will trust me, I'm telling you that all things are possible. Man, this guy on death row, man, that was about as good a news as he had ever heard. He said that quote over and over and over again. That powerful communicator, powerful preacher's words cycled in and out of his brain all day long. The next day he woke up. It was time for his clemency hearing. Sitting with his attorney, he was nervous. He was shaking. Anybody would be if they was about to die. If this was the last chance. And the guy on death row, he looked up in front of him and was shocked. The preacher that he had been listening to, the preacher whose words had touched his heart, the preacher who had changed his every day, who had turned him to God, who had introduced him to Jesus, was now in front of him. He couldn't figure out what was going on. And then he looked up and realized that the powerful preacher, the powerful communicator, his name was Scott Williams, and he was now chairing the Oklahoma Board of Pardons and Paroles. Pastor Scott Williams, he was so happy. It was just so overwhelming for this man to feel like that God was in the room. This message that had drawn him closer to God, the embodiment, the voice that had preached to him so many times was right in front of him. The seeker began to say exactly the words that he had heard before. I have repented. I have asked for forgiveness. I have given my life to Jesus. I am a new creation. I have learned to trust God. I trust God for all of my needs. I stay close to Jesus. I'm standing up. I'm trying to walk on higher paths. I'm doing it God's way. I'm loving God. I'm loving my neighbor. And when he couldn't think anymore, he just kept on praying that the messages that the powerful communicator had shared would come to him. And he kept on spouting those words back at this powerful communicator, Pastor Scott Williams, the chair of the Oklahoma Board of Pardon and Paroles, who was standing in front of him. He said, I believe that all things are possible. I've taken the word impossible and turned it into I'm possible. I've been listening for years and years and years. I've trusted your words, speaking directly to Chairman Williams, Pastor Williams. I've trusted your word. I believe that all things are possible. The seeker went so far, he looked Scott Williams, Pastor Scott Williams, directly in the eyes. And he said, I've done everything that you told me to do. I've done everything that you told me to do. I have followed your God. I've followed your Jesus. I have done everything that you told me to do. It didn't matter. When the final vote was taken, Pastor Scott Williams loudly declared, no clemency, no clemency, no clemency. There was no mercy for the hearer of Pastor Scott Williams' word. There was no mercy for the doer of Pastor Scott Williams' words. You see, that's because Pastor Scott Williams is full of shit. The man who was facing execution was spiritually devastated. You see, he believed all of these fancy words and mesmerizing word illustrations. He believed that the greatest commandment is to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. He had believed everything that this powerful communicator, this powerful preacher, Pastor Scott Williams had said. And when he got the chance to speak to the person who said them, all that they could manifest was no clemency, no clemency, no clemency. You see, this is the problem with prosperity theology, prosperity gospels, prosperity type thinking, because what it does is it says, trust my words. Trust all this fancy stuff I'm saying. Trust all this fancy stuff I'm selling. Trust all of this stuff. Trust all of the lights, all of the crazy music and all of this stuff. But God is saying, trust me. What you have done to the least of these, to the marginalized, to the oppressed, that is what you have done to me. Trust me. Pastor Scott Williams' service on the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board is absolutely disgusting. For this man to be sending people to death shows us one thing and one thing only. He don't know a damn thing about the gospel of Jesus Christ. You see, the gospel of Jesus Christ is about sharing life, sharing love, sharing the beauty of the message of salvation. God's love ain't about killing folk. We are told to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, not kill our neighbors as we kill ourselves. I don't even want to hear Preacher Scott Williams, Pastor Scott Williams, so-and-so at my church, so-and-so prosperity theology. That is got nothing to do with the message of God, the message of love. I'm coming to you right now, especially the folks in Oklahoma, because I want you to know that there is a snake loose. There is a snake loose in Oklahoma. And he sits on the board of pardon and parole. This cat is on the airways teaching prosperity. But all he knows how to do, what he has shown us on the board of pardon and parole is that all he knows how to do is inflict death.